So we're doing this board gaming thing, and it's interesting to see how board games have not only evolved strategically, but also with their production value. And many things that were perhaps unthinkable a few years before, now you're seeing more and more mainstream, kind of more and more standard. One of the things that we're beginning to see, of course, if it's a miniature-based game, well, let's take a step back. We started with counters. Then we went to standees to represent characters or units. Then we went to miniatures, and not just for the main heroes of the board game or the main components, but all of them, to board games where now there are tons and tons of miniatures, maybe like 100 plus miniatures. And of course, as a wargamer with poor impulse control and a completionist mindset, for me, this is a dangerous place to be. I love miniatures, and the production quality is fantastic. Well, now we're starting to see board games that are pre-painted miniatures, and not just kind of at a premium level add-ons, but kind of standard or kind of shaded miniatures. It's very, very interesting, the things that become more and more standard. Cardboard tokens and counters being replaced by acrylic. Dice becoming premium dice. So we see this production value innovation, but it's interesting to see, we also see things that become innovative and then quickly become the standard. And I want to share one example that has changed a lot, in my opinion. And I easily see this becoming kind of the board game de facto standard, especially if you can make the physical production of it a little bit bigger. I love dungeon crawlers. Recently, I pushed up to the channel here in the archive some Hero Quest stuff. I love all sorts of dungeon crawlers. One of the challenges with dungeon crawlers, and it's not a criticism, it's the nature of the tech, is the creation of the dungeon itself, setting up the map itself. So usually what we see is you'll set up the dungeon, a room or a bunch of rooms, depending on the mechanics, and you'll put down some tokens with some furniture, and then you'll put down some tokens that mark other areas, and then you put down the monsters or the encounters. This could take a little bit, especially if it's a big dungeon. And as you go from scenario to scenario, there's setup, there's takedown. It is what it is. Now, of course, some games do this better than others, depending on complexity and scope and size. But it's been interesting to see a couple of recent board games that use this kind of flip book format. This idea of the map is pre-printed in a book format. Now, obviously, the monsters aren't populated because it can't be permanently affixed to the map itself. They need to move around. But essentially, you open a dungeon door and you flip to page C4. It's like a giant choose-your-own-adventure book, and it's a spiral-bound book, so it lays flat. There's the dungeon, ready to go, done. Place the monsters down, and we're ready to start. And this type of mechanic, not only with exploration, cuts the setup time to flip a few pages and drop a few monsters into it. It's very, very interesting and very, very unique, especially if it allows you then to flip to other areas of the dungeon. It cuts down on table space. Wow, what an interesting innovation. You see it, and it's like, why didn't we think of that a while ago? Now, most of the formats I've seen have been a little bit bigger than, I guess, standard, what is it, A4 paper size. But if we do this on a larger size book, that really starts to allow you to have bigger dungeons and interact before we even get into different quests and different incarnations, or even if it's a type of game like Hero Quest that you're going to make your own maps, pre-populate those, playing with different things. That is a board game innovation in the dungeon crawling theme of things that I see becoming more and more prevalent as time moves on, almost to the point where it's an auto-include, almost to the point where it's a standard. Now, turning it over to my fellow dungeon crawler enthusiasts and board game enthusiasts, what innovations do you see evolving now that, look, in another couple of incarnations or a couple of games out there, this is now going to be standard in board game mechanics and board game presentation?